Hello, my name is Jenny Katzman, and I'm a Senior Policy Advisor with the White House Domestic Policy Council. On behalf of the White House and the Department of Justice, I want to welcome you here. Today, you will hear about practices that too often contribute to a cycle of poverty and create significant barriers for people unable to pay monetary penalties imposed by the government. The practices we will be examining are fees and fines and fixed money bail. Under these practices, people who can afford to pay a fine from an infraction, such as a traffic violation, or who can pay their bail, do so, and nothing else happens to them. On the other hand, poor people end up in jail simply for being unable to pay. They lose their jobs. They're forced to decide between paying a private probation company and paying their rent. They end up in jail. Their families suffer. But you all know this. There are so many of you attending who are leaders and experts in this field. And we want you all to connect and share ideas so that when you leave today, you can further help to implement common sense reforms. We have advocates here who have filed suits against these practices. We have judges who have ruled to halt private probation companies from extorting citizens. We have academics and organizations promoting pretrial justice reforms, legislators seeking to pass bills, journalists raising awareness and bringing these issues to light, federal officials who have come out against these practices in statements of interest, via the bully pulpit, and maybe most notably through the Ferguson Report, and administration officials who are leading the effort to reform our criminal justice system to make it fairer and more effective. And I have the distinct honor of introducing one of those administration officials. Valerie Jarrett is a senior advisor to President Barack Obama. She oversees the offices of public engagement and intergovernmental affairs, and is the chair of the White House Council on Women and Girls. Ms. Jarrett has worked throughout her tenure at the White House to mobilize elected officials, business and community leaders, and diverse groups of advocates to strengthen and improve access to the middle class, to boost American businesses and our economy, and to champion equality and opportunity for all Americans. Ms. Jarrett came to the White House with a background in both the private and public sectors, and she herself is a lawyer. Would everyone please join me in welcoming Valerie Jarrett?
Thank you, Jenny, and good morning, everyone. We're all still reeling from the mass shooting yesterday in San Bernardino, and so before we start our program, I was hoping you would join me in just a moment of silence for the victims, for their family, friends, and the community that we know is still quite stricken, as we all are. Thank you. So we are here today to focus in on a very specific issue that we believe in this administration cuts to the core of our desire to make sure that our society is equal for all. But what I wanted to do is to take a step back and put it in the broader context of the president's passion for criminal justice reform. Later this morning, he's having a meeting with a group of our elected officials on the Hill, bipartisan group. And there is momentum building, and I don't often say that I believe Congress will act, but in this instance, I do. And the reason why we believe that there is a momentum growing is because of so many of you in this room. And I want to recognize specifically Michael. Michael, stand up and say hello. I know you're going to be, come on, you, yeah, come on. Come on. Michael Jordan. The Wire was an extraordinary show, and of course, David Simon as well. David, come on, who produced it. An incredible show that uses art to teach us all, not just about the effect that criminal justice has on society, but on the lives of those involved. And so I appreciate your presence. We have a great bipartisan group here that you'll be hearing from, people like Grover Norquist, who is passionate about this issue as well. But the reason why I am so optimistic, as I started out by saying, is that there is momentum growing. It began, I think, this summer where the president laid out at the NAACP exactly what his philosophy about criminal justice is. He focused on the community, he focused on the courtroom, and he focused on the cell block. And he said we have to look at all of the different components of criminal justice because there is a reason why we only have 5% of the world's population in the United States and 25% of those who are incarcerated. There's a reason why we're spending $80 billion a year. And we shouldn't just accept that as the norm. We have to ask ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish, and are we being successful? And so from the speech that he gave at the NAACP, he was the first sitting president to visit a federal prison in Oklahoma. He sat down with inmates and talked to them about their life struggles and what were the reasons and circumstances that led them to prison in the first place, and what were the needs that they had so that when they left prison, they could re-enter life and get that second chance that they had had worked so hard to earn. And then from there, the president just recently went to Newark and he visited a reentry program. And again, he talked to people who'd been incarcerated about the challenges of reentry. One gentleman I'll never forget said, look, I've been in prison for 10 years, and when I left, I had the same clothes on my back that I had when I went to prison. I had a bus ticket to go back to a community that wasn't the community that I left. My family had moved on, my friends had moved on, I had no ties to the community, I was sleeping on a friend's couch. I didn't even know how to use the internet. Didn't know how to use the internet, so how was I going to look for a job? And there, thanks to the U.S. attorney and a federal judge and a probation officer, they had cobbled together resources to help this person get their life back on track. And it made us realize, what are we doing? What are we doing here where we're spending this time and energy helping people after the fact? And how mightily have we contributed at the front end, whereas if we really focused on the policies at the front end, we wouldn't be trying to help people get that second chance at the back end. I visited 2 reentry programs in New York the following week and sat around with youngsters barely out of teenage years who'd made some very poor choices, who were the first to admit they had made poor choices. And they asked the question, who's going to give me that second chance? How am I going to get my life back on track? And interestingly, many of them had children, and they said they wanted to do right by their children, but they just needed that second chance. We know that there is a school-to-prison pipeline. That's why earlier this summer we had a program here where we focused on school discipline and suspensions and expulsions, because we know that those who are suspended and expelled from school are much more likely to go into the juvenile justice system, which is just a gateway to the federal or the state adult system. We know that there's a sexual abuse to prison pipeline, which is why we also had a forum here focusing on that. I visited Los Angeles and sat down with a group of young girls, all who had been victims of the commercial sexual exploitation and committed crimes. And they were getting a second chance because a very special judge who runs the Star Court out there realized that they were victims too and deserved that second chance. And so we're trying to weave together all of the different fabrics of a society that have policies in place right now, or who are violating policies that are in place right now that have a disparate impact, particularly on people of color and those who are poor. And let's face it, that's who we are incarcerating. And so today's program is a part of that ongoing effort that we have to highlight practices that are in place that we know are not helping society, they're hurting society. And so if you can imagine a young woman of color, a single woman, on her way to work, and she gets stopped, and she's given a ticket she can't afford to pay because she can barely make ends meet. And so she doesn't pay the ticket, and so the next time she's stopped, her license is taken away from her. And then she gets picked up for not having a license. And then she ends up in jail rather than on bond because she can't afford the bond. And then she's taken away from not only her family, but from her work. And so then she loses her job. And this nightmare happens all across our country. And thanks to the Justice Department for highlighting a study that they did after Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, Missouri. But we have to understand that this happens all across our country. And so that's why we're gathered here today, is to really talk about these issues and ask ourselves, are we accomplishing what we're setting out to do? Are we actually saving money? The answer is no. It's penny wise and pound foolish, as my grandmother would say. So we appreciate the energy and commitment that you all bring to this issue. This is a top priority of the president. He cares passionately about this issue. There's no way that we're going to have an equal and just society unless we tackle criminal justice reform. And this component of it that we're discussing today is a vitally important point. You'll hear later from our Council on Economic Advisors, who's released a report today that shows incredible data about the disproportionate effect that these practices have on poor communities. And you're going to hear right now from our Attorney General, who I'm so proud to introduce to you, who has been a passionate leader on the front of criminal justice reform, who is committed to working with each and every one of you, who's well represented by her team who is here today. So please join me in welcoming Loretta Lynch, please. I was hoping you were back there. Thank you. And did you hear they went to the stage?
I'm good, thanks. Well, good morning, everyone. Okay, look, it's early. There's still energy. Good morning, everyone. Okay, we need that energy because we have a lot to talk about and we have a lot to do. We have a lot going on. Let me echo Ms. Jarrett's words about the tragic events in California yesterday, just before we move on to that. As you may have heard, the Department of Justice has dispatched the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the U.S. Marshals Service personnel to the scene as soon as that assault began. And we continue to work closely alongside our state and local law enforcement partners who are working so hard on the scene and its aftermath. And let me assure you that as this investigation unfolds, we will be offering any and all assistance necessary to the local authorities and to the people of San Bernardino who have been so profoundly affected by this unspeakable crime. And let me simply say that whatever the results of this investigation, we don't know a lot right now. But one thing is clear, that violence like this has no place in this country and in this nation. This is not what we stand for. This is not what we do. This is not what we work for. It's not what we live for. It's antithetical to our values. Now, I don't have any operational updates for you at this time. Those will come later from the local authorities who are on the scene. But I do want to express not only my deepest condolences, but also ask that you join me in standing with our colleagues, our friends, our partners in San Bernardino who are suffering with this, and add all of our thoughts and prayers to them at this time, along with them and also the brave public safety officials who have put themselves in harm's way to stop this assault and to save others. So I thank you, Ms. Jarrett, for that moment of silence, and I thank all of you for your continued support as we move forward with this investigation. Now, of course, today's announcement is of a matter really of equal seriousness, but of long-standing concern. And I'm really pleased to be able to be here today. I'm actually thrilled that this event is being held here today, now at this time. Because we're at a point where these issues have come together really like never before in law enforcement thought and in our nation's history, and it gives us a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful moment to really make significant change. You all are such a distinguished group of advocates, of lawmakers, judges, experts, and we're all here to talk about today how we can ensure that our legal system serves every American faithfully, fairly, regardless of their economic systems. So let me pose the beginning question of the day. What is the price of justice? What is the price of justice? Some 52 years after Gideon versus Wainwright was decided by the Supreme Court, we are still seeing ways in which one of our most cherished ideals has been overlaid with costs that are really borne by those who can least afford to pay. And few questions are more deserving of our time and attention. I think this is really one of the leading criminal justice questions of the day. Because the work that we do in this area is not only intertwined with the experiences, the everyday experiences of people in this country, and the way in which those experiences shape their future, but it is also emblematic of the way in which we administer one of our most cherished and essential ideals. And to begin to answer this question, what is the price of justice, requires us to go back to the essential promise of our criminal justice system, which is equal justice for all. And it requires us to work to ensure that all of our efforts serve that end. Now, as you're going to talk about today, and as you've heard a little bit about in the preview, we have made great progress in recent years. I am tremendously proud of the work that the Department of Justice has been doing to keep this issue, equal justice for all, in all applications of the law, at the forefront of everything that we do. Now, under my predecessor and your friend, former Attorney General Eric Holder, the department launched the Smart on Crime initiative to make our criminal justice system more efficient, more effective, and more fair. Today, we are seeing congressmen and women from both sides of the aisle, lawmakers from both sides, in bipartisan support for legislation that would reduce the mandatory minimum sentences for some nonviolent drug crimes. Whether it is because of a recognition of the essential unfairness that has been visited on some of our populations, or also a recognition of the economic cost that ultimately is also borne by those communities, it matters not. It is a unique moment in time in which we have come together to finally focus on the effects of our system. And also, because at its heart, an effective criminal justice system requires both the faith and the participation of not just those of us in law enforcement, but those of us that we serve. I've made it one of my top priorities as Attorney General to help repair community trust where it's been eroded. Now, in September, I recently completed a 6-city community policing tour, which allowed me to learn from a variety of law enforcement agencies, civic leaders, and local services in 6 very challenged jurisdictions that have worked hard to pull themselves back from the brink and to find a way to communicate. I've had the pleasure and privilege of sitting with everyday people who've made it their job to find ways to find common ground between the mom at home and the cop on the beat, the kid in school and the police officer driving down the street, to build confidence in the system, not in any one person, but in a process that lets everyone have a voice. Now, these are important steps, and it's been heartening for me as I travel the country to look for things that we can then share with other jurisdictions that are struggling with these same issues. But as I travel the country, it's all too clear that we have so much more work to do before we truly realize the idea of equal justice for all. Because, as is the topic of the day and the topic for all of you, it has become painfully clear, and that I do mean painfully clear, that in so many instances an individual's access to justice has become predicated on their ability to literally pay for it. What is the price of justice? What is the price of justice? When bail is set unreasonably high, people are behind bars only because they are poor. Not because they're a danger or a flight risk, only because they're poor. They don't have money to get out of jail, and they certainly don't have money to flee anywhere. Other people who do have the means can avoid this system, setting inequality in place from the beginning. And when fines and fees are imposed on top of the jail sentences, even after offenders have paid their debt to society, and that's what we have said. We have determined as a society, as a country, as a people, that the incarceration and the supervision and the specific fines for a particular crime are that person's debt to society. And a debt must be capable of being paid if it is not instead a lifetime yoke of servitude. Let me repeat that. A debt must be capable of being paid if it is not a lifetime yoke of servitude. And even before Gideon versus Wainwright, we had a constitutional amendment that ended that. Now, as we've talked about also, the fines for minor things like traffic violations, literally getting to work, getting around and living your life, can often carry additional administrative fees. They can carry jail time. In a city, in a country where we have ruled that debtors' prisons are unconstitutional, too many of our citizens are simply in jail because they don't have the money to get out. In America, because they don't have the money to get out. And of course, in some jurisdictions, we've seen the rise of a totally new issue. New to me, in my 20 years as a prosecutor when I began, we didn't have the private probation companies that now work alongside many of our court-authorized probation companies. And many of these companies will supervise individuals who can't afford to immediately pay the full amount of their fines and fees. You might say, a laudable goal, private industry stepping in to relieve a burden on a challenged government agency. But what happens is those who can't pay those fees and fines get charged additional probation fees on top of them. Only the people who pay are put on this type of probation, and people who can afford to pay walk out of court without any supervision. That is not probation. That's Walmart. Money talks and people walk. That is not our criminal justice system. It's not the one that we wrote over 200 years ago. It's not the one that we fought for in the years since then. It's not the one that those of us who work in this system today intend to see go forward. Now, of course, we still have, even after Gideon versus Wainwright, a crisis in indigent defense. It was strikingly sad that on the 50th anniversary of Gideon, we were talking about cuts to legal aid services. We were talking about cuts to essential services at both the federal and state levels that would have meant more people of poverty did not have the ability to have their essential rights vindicated. Now, when you look at all of this together, and I know this is what you all will be doing today, what we are seeing in this country amounts to nothing less than the criminalization of poverty, not of actions, not of deeds, but of a condition that is not of people's making. This is not the criminal justice system in which those of us who are working for fairness and for equality are going to be pursuing. This is not where we are leading today. Because the consequences of the criminalization of poverty are not only harmful, but they are so far-reaching. They affect families beyond the individual lives, and individuals' ability to support their family, eaten away by the deadly fines and fees for minor infractions. And more than that, more than the economic issues, more than the inconvenience that some might term this, what this does is it contributes to a fundamental erosion of a faith in our government, a fundamental sense of disbelief that government is there to serve people when people see government in many, many ways and forms as simply a means of extracting money and pressing down on their necks. And we have all seen the results of this mistrust. We've seen how it has moved beyond these issues and affected our communities across the country and citizens' trust and faith, not only in law enforcement, but in all of us and in government writ large. Ms. Jarrett noted the Department of Justice's Ferguson report, which came out earlier this year. I'm tremendously proud of the work that was done by our Civil Rights Division, both on that investigation and that report. And people were looking, of course, for a review of policing practices. But what that report did, because what was so obvious when we went there and looked at what was occurring in Ferguson, and sadly in other towns, is that there were shameful and unacceptable municipal court and law enforcement practices that together worked to turn the justice system into a for-profit enterprise at the expense of public safety. So that the mistrust and, in fact, the pain that we saw in Ferguson went far beyond the single tragic incident of Mr. Brown's death and was showcasing the disconnection and the pain people felt at their lack of connection to their city overall. And as we now know, these methods and procedures really caused catastrophic damage to the citizens' trust in their public officials. And without that trust, without that credibility, those of us in government have no capital to rely upon when we need to make change, when we need to move procedures and move policies and ask people to trust us and work with us as we do so. That's the damage in that. It goes so far beyond just those immediate incidents. In an example strikingly similar to what Ms. Jarrett talked about, one Ferguson resident received 2 traffic tickets, just 2, in the year 2007. They totaled $152. Not an insignificant amount of money, but by the time our report was issued earlier this year in 2015, she had paid the city of Ferguson $550 in fines and fees. Quite a profit, quite a markup. Was she buying furniture? What was going on? She had been arrested twice for these unpaid tickets. She'd spent 6 days in jail, and Inexplicably, as of earlier this year, as of the time the report was issued, the city calculated she still owed them $541, from $152 to almost $1,000. We've outlawed usury, we've outlawed debtors' prisons. We cannot cloak it in the language of fees and fines and make it right. Now, these and countless other experiences cause daily struggles for people across this country. And of course, they lead to an environment in which all these long simmering tensions affect us every day. Now, this is an especially important moment for criminal justice reform, as we've talked about. And I know this is what you all are going to be focusing on today. And I'm so glad that you are here, because now is the time that we have to bring focus to this issue. We are at a critical juncture. We truly have the opportunity to make headway in this and so many important issues. And as all of us in this room know, these challenges are not new. Indeed, for many of the Americans that I've talked about who have been living under the yoke of these fees and fines, they're in fact a fixture of everyday life. But they are being seen, and they are being heard to a degree never seen and heard before. And while the action to amend the practices like those identified in the Ferguson report and in other municipalities is long overdue, we now have a growing consensus among people of all political stripes and personal backgrounds that the shortcomings of our justice system are not only poor policy, as many of us who work in it have been saying and seeking change, but they are in desperate need of change. Now is the time, and we have to seize this moment. Now, we've talked about the Ferguson report, but the Department of Justice is also determined to be an important contributor to this effort. Our Office of Justice Programs, led by Carol Mason, who's here today, we're looking to make funding available to local municipalities to support innovative alternatives to fees and to fines and these legal financial obligations that contribute to the cycle of incarceration and poverty. OJP's Office of Civil Rights is also evaluating discrimination complaints against several court systems to determine whether their pretrial and bail practices violate federal laws. Now, our Civil Rights Division writ large, led by Vanita Gupta, who's also here today, and our Office for Access to Justice, led by my classmate Lisa Foster, so glad to see her, have also filed statements of interest where the federal government has a unique voice to lend and role to play in a number of cases already filed in this area, including cases about unlawful bail, the right to counsel, and the criminalization of homelessness, something that we have to address, particularly as more and more of our people who are facing mental illness and more and more of our returning veterans fall into this category. And they also continue to evaluate whether pending lawsuits warrant new statements of interest from the department. This work is ongoing. And the Office of Justice Programs Diagnostic Center will be preparing a report from this convening, from this meeting, to outline a national research and policy agenda that will help to advance the conversation about criminal justice reform. And that's another reason why I thank all of you for being here today, because we need you for this. We can't do this alone. So much of this work will happen, as it must, at the state and local levels, where you live and where you work alongside the people that we all serve. Now, the breadth of the original Gideon decision was its application of the right to counsel to all cases, and not just the federal capital level, but the state level as well, where so much procedural justice begins. The face of justice for so many of our citizens is not in the federal courthouse where I live and work, but it's at the Parking Bureau, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Water Department, the county courthouse. That face of justice must be open and fair at every door and at every window. And whether you're a state legislator with a say in the use of fines and fees as a source of revenue, whether you're a judge who sets bail and passes sentence, and we're not encouraging you to abdicate any responsibility in terms of public safety or making sure that people who should not be on the streets are. But what you may be a court administrator who collects fines and fees. You also may be a thought leader who studies crime and poverty, or an advocate who stands beside those people most directly affected. You're making a real difference. Please know that. And you are indispensable to bringing all of these efforts to completion. to ensuring that in the United States of America, there is indeed no price tag on justice. And I commit to you, as the Attorney General, that this Department of Justice and this entire administration will continue to stand with you and to do everything in our power to further this important mission. Now, let me end as I began. What is the price of justice? But let me now point out the fundamental error in the question I posed, that it is a question at all. The fundamental error of the question that I posed, and the one which sadly so many of us start with, and of the policies that seek to answer that question with a specific amount, is in thinking of justice as a commodity that can be quantified, rather than a right inherent to all who stand under the sheltering arm of our Constitution. Because to reduce this essential ideal, this precious ideal, that I know means as much to you as it does to me, to try and to reduce this ideal to mere coin, is an effort not only doomed to fail, but ultimately it is an effort that cheapens us all. Now, as we know, Gideon won his case before the Supreme Court. He won a new trial, and he was acquitted and released. And he went on to live for several years thereafter, but he kept in touch with his attorney, Abe Fortas, in the pre-Supreme Court days. And when he died, his headstone is inscribed with a line from a letter that he wrote to that lawyer. And the inscription reads, "Each era finds an improvement in law for the benefit of mankind." Now let this not only be the issue of the day, let it be the improvement of our era. So I want to thank all of you who've come today to work on these important issues, to continue the work and the thoughts that you have begun at the local level, to come together, to talk together, to learn from each other, to listen to each other, and to commit again to the issue of this day and the improvement of our era. Thank you so much for your time this morning and the work that's been done. It's been such a pleasure to see you all.
Thank you, Attorney General Lynch, for those important remarks. We're now turning to our first panel conversation. Leading that conversation is Emily Bazelon. Emily is a journalist, staff writer for New York Times Magazine, and a senior research scholar in law and Truman Capote Fellow for creative writing and law at Yale Law School. Emily and panel, please come up. Come on up.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning. And I'm going to say a huge thank you to this amazing panel that I somehow get to moderate. I'm so honored to be here. I'm a super fan of each of the three people who I get to introduce to you this morning. Right next to me is Cynthia Jones, who is a law professor at American University, used to be at the Public Defender Services in Washington, D.C., which is an amazing organization, as I'm sure many of you know, and is currently working on the American Bar Association Racial Justice Improvement Project, which is certainly relevant to the issues that we're talking about today. And Cynthia has written some really important work on bail reform and is going to help set the terms for the conversation. And next to Cynthia, really needing little introduction, I'm sure, is Michael B. Jordan, who I just had the pleasure of watching on the big screen in Creed, the new Rocky movie, which you guys should all go see if you haven't. And I have to say, and I wonder if some of you feel this way too, I feel like I've been watching Michael on screen for a long time, since he was like a scrawny kid in David's amazing show, The Wire. And so I have this sense, it's like an unearned sense of, I don't know, pride that he's like a real big movie star now. It's so great. Michael is also in Friday Night Lights, which I have to call out because it's another favorite show of mine, and the movie Fruitvale Station. And he is going to be playing Brian Stevenson, the defense lawyer, in a film version of Brett. And next to Michael is David Simon, who was a cops reporter in Baltimore and somehow pulled off the kind of, holy grail of journalism, of turning the issues he cared about into material for TV shows, for a book first, The Corner, which is about Baltimore, then a TV show based on The Corner, and then The Wire, which, is like no other American TV show. And one of the things I always feel is so important to point out about The Wire is that I think one of the biggest divisions in American life today is between middle-class people and poor people. A lot of us don't know poor people well. We don't really spend time with them. So it's no substitute for really getting to know people who are different from you, but at least we have The Wire coming in through TV screens and giving us a window into the lives of poor people. And I also know that The Wire is a show that poor people themselves watch. As a journalist, it's something that I find I have in common with people I'm writing about. And they are moved by it and find it to be accurate in a way that speaks, volumes to David's work in this area. Okay. That seems like enough to help us get started. I'm going to start us off with Cynthia sort of laying the groundwork for us here. So what are the big flaws in our bail system and our system of imposing fees and fines? What are you seeing in your work that really jumps out at you?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that in every jurisdiction in this country where there has been a study of racial and ethnic disparities in bail, they have found racial and ethnic disparities in bail. If you live in a place where money is used to determine whether someone who's been arrested is going to be detained or released, there are racial and ethnic disparities in the bail system in your jurisdiction, right? When you use money, it has a disparate impact on the poor. There's not a person in this room who would be held in jail because you could not afford $500 to get out. Yet currently, as we go to bed tonight, there will be thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who are going to be held in jail simply because they're too poor to afford $500, $1,000, and some $250. So we know that there are racial and ethnic disparities in bail, and it's irresponsible for us to talk about bail reform or debtors' prisons or any of these issues of finance in the criminal justice system without addressing the distinct impact that it has on people of color. Black and brown people, thank you. Black and brown people are overrepresented in the criminal justice system, and they're well overrepresented in pretrial detention. And we know why. In brief, we have racial and ethnic disparities in bail because poor people are overrepresented and money is keeping them locked up. So if we were to get rid of money and actually go back to the original idea of bail, that it is a mechanism for release, not a mechanism for detention, and that bail should be tethered to the notion that an individual is a flight risk or a danger to the community and not simply based on how much money. We would get rid of a lot of people who are detained and address the racial and ethnic disparities. But that would not solve the problem because we have a rogue system of imposing bail in this country. You probably live in a system where either there is a bond schedule, and it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a PhD or a homeless veteran or a war hero. If you are arrested for armed robbery, the bond schedule dictates how much your bail is going to be. No consideration of whether you're a flight risk or a danger. Armed robbery just equals $50,000. And in New Jersey and in some other jurisdictions, they set that bail before you've even been arrested. Another problem with this is once bail is determined, even if there's not a bond schedule, once bail is set by a bail official, it is rarely reviewed, and no one ever goes back to see if the particular bail schedule, bail commissioner has a pattern of racial and ethnic disparities. So they may very well be engaging in practices that not even they know are causing racial and ethnic disparities. But it usually comes down to the fact that that bail official has no information to make an informed decision. So let me just close with this as my initial comment. When a bail official is given the authority over an arrestee to determine how much money that person has to pay for their freedom, and the only thing that bail official knows about the person is what they're currently charged with and what they look like, there's a good chance that what you look like might equal what that bail official thinks is a dangerous person. Or if you're Latino, what that bail official might think is a flight risk. And that decision on whether you're locked up or detained will be very much influenced by what you look like.
Thank you for that. Michael, you have played some characters who are caught up in the criminal justice system or on the edges of it. I think some of the most memorable characters we've had recently. I'm thinking of Wallace in The Wire and Vince in Friday Night Lights, and then the character of Oscar in Fruitvale Station, whose life really unspools in ways that are not his doing. So when you are thinking about these characters and how you're going to play them, what are you bringing to these roles from your own experience, and what are you trying to convey to the audience? Why do you pick these parts?
You gotta press that guy? Got it. Okay, works. I mean, honestly, being a young black man, living in America, and I'm from Newark, New Jersey, and, you know, being the complete opposite of those characters, statistically, I shouldn't be here. I have, you know, both my parents, they've been together, 30 years, both work, multiple jobs to give me and my brothers and sisters, a roof over our head and give us opportunities to kind of stay out of the inner city and kind of stay out of those pitfalls that a lot of these characters that I have portrayed often fall in. And, I was so young portraying those characters, extremely young and not really understanding, everything, the entire system and just kind of how things work. My parents made sure we were very aware of what was going on in the city of Newark. So, what would I be like if I didn't have my father, if he wasn't around, or that stable household, or, what kind of decisions would I have made, growing up that might shape and change my future, drastically. My dad works for the community of the food bank of New Jersey, and he often works with a couple of programs for reentry, for prisoner reentry, and seeing these guys, my father gives them jobs, and the fees and the fines that they have to pay off of making $10 an hour, they walk home with somewhere around $2.50 of that $10 an hour. How can you support yourself positively back in the community when you don't really have those options? So seeing the opportunities stripped away from these mostly black males, seeing that male presence leave the inner city, how that shapes a young man not having a father figure, not having that male influence around to make better decisions, how that changes these characters' psychology moving forward, I think is very important. David did a extremely a very, very well detailed job in just shaping these characters and how putting these people in situations that they would see themselves in, and how would you be able to get out? If you limit yourself to these opportunities, how would you be able to make any sound decisions moving forward? So anyway, I just try to bring as much humanity and real emotion to these characters. So for somebody who's never been to the inner city, who's never had FaceTime with a Wallace or a Vince or Oscar Grant, how would you feel, how would you react if you was in those same situations? And that empathy, being able to see what's on the other side of the tracks. And then maybe if we connect those dots, the humanity will shine through between, people from the inner city and people that may not be able to, like you said, have those poor experiences, be around poor people in those type of situations. Just trying to connect the dots through art. Hide the medicine in the food is my approach, and that's something I've been trying to do with my characters moving forward as well.
Very successfully.
Thank you. Tried to articulate that. Best way I could.
So, David, one of the elements of your show is that you really show the damage that government can do to people's lives. Now, I mean, government can be a very positive force, but there is also a way that government can bring people down, and sometimes it can be almost inadvertent because it's a small thing that goes wrong, and that's one way of thinking about what we're talking about. You also are incredibly knowledgeable about these issues and reported on them for a long time. So what are your concerns about the bail system and the system of fees and fines that you see from your reporting and that you brought to your shows?
I think the overall critique of what we've done in a lot of the work has been, it's rooted in the overlay of the drug war, which for the years that I was a police reporter in Baltimore and for the years that I was reporting on, got ratcheted up and had entirely morphed from a presumed war on dangerous narcotics to being a war on the poor. It really was that. It was social control, and it was applied in a way that was social control across the board. And my city, Baltimore, which of course has reaped the whirlwind of embracing the drug war. I mean, at our height, we were a city of 630,000, locking up 120,000 people a year. And of course, they were all channeling through, and this, by the way, of course, if you know Maryland, it's a blue state. It's a very liberal state. It's a state that prides itself on progressivism. And yet, if you parse the criminal justice system, it had lost its mind over the drug war to the point where, they weren't just locking up violent offenders. They weren't even just locking up drug offenders. At one point, my local authorities made a quarter of the real estate, maybe even a third of the real estate, into something they called the drug-free zone. The joke in Baltimore was that that's where drugs are free, but in reality, what it was saying we don't need the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution on this real estate. You're loitering in it. We're going into your pockets. We're going to arrest you on charges that are insubstantial. We're going to send you to Eager Street. And then you'll figure out how you're going to deal with the court commissioner and how you're going to get out and what it's going to cost you to get back on the street. And if in probable causes now, if you looked at me for 2 seconds too long, it also taught a generation of police in my city how not to do police work. So that the clearance rate for murder right now, when you actually need a police officer, the clearance rate in my city went from about 70% when I was in the homicide unit to write a book in 1988. It's now 30%. And that, by the way, is not the punitive rate for offenders. 70% clearance rate kicks out to about 40% actually receiving jail time once you go through the court system. So we're looking at maybe if you shoot somebody in Baltimore City today, and of course Baltimore now has the highest murder rate it's ever had in its history per capita right now. You're looking at a 30% clearance rate, and maybe 1 in 10 of the offenders are actually seeing jail time. We taught a whole generation of law enforcement how not to do their jobs. How instead to go into people's pockets for, a vial here or a glassine bag there, and then to lie about the probable cause in district court as to why they were in that person's pockets to begin with. If that's what gets a police officer promoted to sergeant or lieutenant, and it is in my city, then what you've created is a police department that can't actually investigate crime retroactively. They can't write a search warrant without perjuring themselves. They can't take the stand without perjuring themselves. They can't effectively build a case. So, there's an old adage that stupid crime makes for stupid cops. It's an old station house adage. It happened in Baltimore. Fighting the drug war was stupid, and it made for an entire generation of police officers who can't actually police. And then once all these people got to court and found what was there waiting for them, whether or not some of them were loitering because it was their front steps of their row house or because they were coming home from work, and they ended up locked up. My own film crew, when we shot in Baltimore, particularly the African-American members of the crew, they'd get off work, we'd be shooting in East Baltimore, and they'd end up at city jail, where there would be a state's attorney waiting for them. Thank you, Martin O'Malley, for this moment. There'd be a state's attorney waiting for them with a form that said, listen, if you'll sign the form saying you won't, make any claim of false arrest, you can go home tonight. Okay, but if you don't sign the form, you won't see a court commissioner for 48 hours. What do you want to do? And this was hundreds of thousands of people. If you think I'm making it up, read the ACLU suit that the city eventually had to settle. Those people became your jury pool. Those are the people who you're now asking in Baltimore right now during the trial of the officers in the Freddie Gray case. You're asking them to believe the testimony of police who've been lying on them for 30 years. So, I mean, it's done such damage to the credibility of government. What the Attorney General said was precise in terms of what it has done to just the whole validity of law enforcement that we actually need to accomplish its goals.
Right, so you're talking about priorities, I think, and then the way in which the wrong priorities can swamp all the important work that we need the criminal justice system to do. So Cynthia, tell us what some of the best ideas for reform are out there. What are the things that you're looking for that you would like the people in this room to really be seriously considering implementing?
So the best idea to address bail reform is the creation of pretrial services agencies. There's a model pretrial services agency here in the District of Columbia, and there's an organization called the Pretrial Justice Institute that is really spearheading the effort to bring pretrial services across the country. And what we're talking about is, instead of judges and bond officials making these decisions in a vacuum and without information to make informed decisions, actually employing people who interview the arrestees, who do a background investigation, and help the judge decide whether the person is a flight risk or a danger to the community, and if not, then releasing the person without any money being owed. But if a judge doesn't have that information, they can't really make an informed decision about whether this particular person is dangerous and this particular person is not dangerous. So one of the best ideas of reform is having a pretrial services agency, and then even the people who cannot be released sort of outright, they can be released with conditions, right? Maybe drug testing, or maybe I have to call in once a week. Again, it's not about my money, it's about managing the risk that I pose. And so the MacArthur Foundation has a safety and justice initiative. There's lots of technical assistance for jurisdictions seeking to reform their justice system. But that is the where everyone should be moving, towards getting rid of money, and instead of making bail decisions based upon resources, making those bail decisions in an informed way based upon the actual risk that arrestees pose or not.
Michael, how can actors and other people who are in the public eye help to achieve reform on issues like this? They can be hard for people to really grasp and understand.
I mean, I think through storytelling. I think one of my, our biggest tools is to tell stories that, people from outside of the community won't be able to understand because they would, never come in contact with. I think storytelling is the perfect way to bridge gaps between communities and countries, and just, understanding. Especially with these characters, two things that these people that we're speaking about have going against them that they have no control over is, one's where you're born and the color of your skin. And that's something that, they're fighting against their entire lives and their systems. So through storytelling and, creative ways of, of understanding, I think it'll be very beneficial for the future, for sure.
Go ahead, David.
I've found that on an industry level, the thing to do when you want to make people care about the people most affected in these worlds is to shoot Michael B. Jordan.
On film.
On film. When he was Wallace, at the end we shot him, and suddenly people cared about people, and when he was Oscar Grant and Fruitvale State, they shot him, and suddenly people cared about over-policing. And I think if we shoot him every 2 or 3 years, we might actually touch on some of the conscience that ought to be out there about these issues.
I slightly disagree with that one, but good point. Good point.
We should be able to reform our criminal justice system without shooting this man every couple of years.
Well, I don't know. I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old at home, and I really want to watch The Wire with them. But 12-year-old's 12, and I was talking to my husband about it, and he said, "Remember Wallace got shot? I don't think Simon can handle that right now."
And that type of impact, over a decade later, is what we're talking about.
That's right. But it's because of the empathy that you and David make people feel. Did you want to add anything?
No, I'm good. I think I'm good on that one.
David, are there other kinds of issues that you want to highlight here? I know that some of your actors on The Wire have gotten caught
Oh,
up
wow.
in the system.
I mean, we had, the Attorney General really hit it in another place, which is to say, the for-profit, the parasitic notion of for-profit that has entered in the criminal justice system not only has induced, these levels of incarceration that are just astonishing. No other country in the world, I think per capita, we incarcerate, I mean, we're I think by numbers, we have more people in prison than China.
2.2 million.
Yeah, and I think China's got us outclassed by population by a considerable amount, and yet, right down to the for-profit companies that end up latching on to the pretrial services or end up sort of grinding their way into the system, and then they are in it for the game, man. And I mean, I can tell you, the one thing that hasn't been touched on, that hasn't been addressed is the affronts to pretrial and the bail system. They not only affect people's ability to stay out pretrial, they make people plead guilty to what they're not guilty of. Bail was never supposed to be an inducement to not having your day in court. Well, actually you didn't work with her, you were dead by then, but another actor who came up hard in Baltimore, Felicia Pearson, who played the character Snoop on The Wire, and was really trying to make a go of being straight, and was studying acting and trying to master this role, and she was playing a character on the show. She's from that other Baltimore that had she grew up in a Baltimore, and she grew up hard, and she had trouble when she was young, and she went to prison as a juvenile. And, it's hard for us to say, it's hard for us in this room to imagine, but her view of law enforcement, shaped by all of these affronts. I mean, you got to remember, every time you encounter a cop in Baltimore, if you're a person of color, you can't imagine how many times I've walked by and seen 16 and 17, 18-year-olds handcuffed on the sidewalk, sitting on a curb, 3 police cars around them, while a bunch of police officers try to figure out whether they committed a crime or not, leave them there, humiliate them there for 25 minutes, and then figure out, no, we're going to throw them back, like catch and release. Okay, here you go. Now you can go on to wherever you were headed. So she grew up where every encounter was that. For her, the police are. She's in Gaza. She's in Soweto. This is an army of occupation. This is not officer friendly. This is the enemy. The drug war did that. The drug war made everybody the enemy in a drug-saturated city like Baltimore. It's like telling people who work in an industry that is, it's like in Montgomery, Alabama, or Birmingham, Alabama, don't work in the steel mills. Everything else is gone. The corners are what is hiring. So this is the world I came up in. The police are the enemy. Now she happens to find herself, she's ordering some carryout. This story's going to take just a few minutes, but it's a killer. It's a killer. She's ordering some carryout. Guy next to her a friend of hers gets in an argument with somebody else. She has nothing to do with it. The camera in the carryout shows she's as startled as anybody. He ends up stabbing somebody, killing them. She's getting a meal, and she's just astonished by it. The police come, and they ask her to be a witness. This is like, I can't explain this to you, but this is like, this would be like the South African police coming to somebody in Soweto during apartheid and saying, please be a witness for us. It can't work. She can't go back to her neighborhood. She's like, no, use the tape, do what you got to do, but I'm not witnessing for you guys. Now she's made enemies. Now, fast forward a year and a half, she's caught on a wiretap saying something that nobody can actually figure out what she was saying. There's no overt act. She never is caught with any drugs. She doesn't buy drugs. She doesn't have drugs. They don't find her doing anything. There's a sentence in there that nobody can actually figure out, the subject, the verb, and the object. I don't know whether she was engaged in anything illegal. Certainly the police don't. But they arrest her anyway because they're mad at her. They're mad at her for this murder case, which is still ongoing, and she won't testify. We don't have enough evidence to convict her. What should we do? Well, it's a wiretap case. It's not going to court for 2 years. Let's put a bracelet on her ankle and say, we're going to give you no bail. Now, this is a woman who's working as an actress. She's working on films now. This is after The Wire. We're going to give you no bail for this one statement that we don't even know what the hell you said on this wiretap. We were not tapping your phone. We were tapping this other person's phone, and you just happened to call in for a minute. But we're going to give you no bail unless you want to wear this bracelet. Okay, how much is the bracelet? $400 a week. Okay, well, I'm making I'll try to pay it. I don't want to spend 2 years at women's detention. I have an acting career. I have a job in Philly in a month. $400 a week. She starts paying the money. After about 9, 10 months, she's broke. She's selling the house she bought for her mother. She's broke. She hasn't even paid the lawyer yet. She wants to go to court. The lawyer wants to go to court. They want their day in court. Eventually, a year and maybe a few weeks out, she pled guilty. Now, of course, they knew they had no case. For a conspiracy to possess heroin, she actually took a suspended sentence. They gave her no time. But of course, now they've got her in the system. Now she's got 10 years of probation. Now all she has to do is not show up for probation and they can keep her. And this is somebody who was trying to crawl out of that world and into our world. And you know what? The last question is the best question. Hey, if you still want to go to trial and you're found innocent, do you get the $400 a week back? Oh, no. No, that went to some company that had a no-bid contract with the state of Maryland. And this, again, I come from a progressive state, so sorry for the long-winded, but that just defines it right there. You know, this is not about profit. The idea that privatization should be anywhere, if the product is incarcerating human beings, this is a disease for our society to contemplate that as a product and to let people make money off of it. It's just insane.
I think you all have done an amazing and sobering job of laying out the challenges here and the debilitating impact that these systems have on people's lives, whether they were put in place kind of inadvertently or not. We're at a moment in which the people in the other world you're talking about are subject to the kind of injustices that are, I think, for most of us, unimaginable. And the idea that that divide really exists, that there would be two different justice systems in this country is really upsetting, as I'm sure it is for all of you in this room too. So I hope that this will help you go forward with these stories in your mind as you are working on helping to address these issues. And I just want to say such a huge thank you to all of you just for coming.
Sorry that went on so long. I got wound up on Snoop, sorry.
Thank you, Emily, David, Michael, and Cynthia. That was great. Is it not on? Can you hear me? Okay. Our next speaker is Grover Norquist. He's president of Americans for Tax Reform. He chairs the Washington, D.C.-based Wednesday meeting, a weekly gathering of more than 150 elected officials, political activists, and grassroots leaders. He's also been an outspoken advocate for a safer, smarter, and more cost-effective approach to criminal justice. Grover is a Right on Crime signatory and is here to provide his perspective on the issues we're discussing today. Without further ado, Grover Norquist.
Thank you. When I was a kid, parents always said, if you have trouble, if you have a question, go to the policeman. He's your friend. They never said that about IRS agents. I've never heard it said about IRS agents. And yet, we've turned, at the local level, a lot of the police force into tax collectors. Fines, citations, traffic. And when people run into police, how many times is it that they want money from them, and how many times is it that they're there to help them with some problem? And then we wonder why we have challenges between communities and police. The police do several kinds of tax collecting. Civil asset forfeiture. They come and they take your car, they take any money you've got on you, you might get it back, you don't have to be convicted of anything, you got to sue to get it back. It can be quite a bit of money. You don't have to be convicted, and then they divide it up, and the people who made the decision to arrest you and charge you get the lion's share of the cash that you had or the value of your home or your car. Pirates had contracts where they decide when they looted somebody who got how much, and the agreement on how they divide up civil asset forfeiture reads a lot like those pirate contracts among all the pirates. Some solution there. In New Mexico, they said, look, you actually have to be convicted before they can take your stuff. They have to give it back if you're not convicted, step one. Step two, if they're going to take your stuff, it goes into the general fund, not to the guy who decided to arrest you. So the incentive is not there because I'm going to skim off the top and get my vig. It goes into the general fund. You're punished because you were bad and you were convicted and you did something wrong. Okay, goes into the general fund, not to the guy who decided to pull you over. Civil asset forfeiture is one thing. But now we've seen and learned a lot from Ferguson and looking at other cities that we have the same sort of policing for profit at the local level where they go after the number of fines that they can get there. And it becomes fairly arbitrary. Who gets a ticket? Where do they put the police to go put tickets out for parking? Where do they put the people who are going to give tickets for speeding? And in the study done on Ferguson, it's a letter sent to the police chief advising how best to be a police chief. Well, it's from the city finance director in March 2010. City finance director is explaining to the police chief how to police. Quote, unless ticket writing ramps up significantly before the end of the year, it will be hard to significantly raise collections next year. Given that we are looking at a substantial sales tax shortfall, it's not an insignificant issue. Court fees are anticipated to rise about 7.5%. I did ask the chief if he thought the PD could deliver a 10% increase. He indicated he could try. So we've got the tax collectors explaining to the police how and then where to police. Next note was a note back from the chief, Jackson, explaining that we're looking at different shift schedules, which will place more officers on the street. Oh, good, we're all going to be safer, which will in turn increase traffic enforcements per shift. So we're going to have more police. They're going to make more money for the city. Finance director sent another note also explaining to police how and where they should police, recommending immediate implementation of an I-270 traffic enforcement initiative to, quote, stop drunk driving? No, it's not what it says. To stop speeders? No, it's quote, to begin to fill the revenue pipeline, unquote. And this will require paying 5 officers overtime for highway traffic enforcement for a 4-hour shift. The finance director stated that, quote, there's nothing to keep us from running this initiative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or even 7 days a week. We've turned too many of the police into tax collectors and then wonder why they don't have a strong relationship with the community. Sam Adams could have told them. Mithridates could have told them. This is to collect taxes and to be loved is not something that Lorenzo de Medici thought likely. In Ferguson, we found that you can go pay your tickets or argue about your tickets. They only have 3 or 4 days a month where you can do that. So 500 people show up, and they're only there for less than 3 hours. So they run that through, and of course, if you don't make it during the time when it's available there, you didn't pay, and the fees can go up and get multiplied again and again. Some people have tried to fix this, and again, this is not just Ferguson. In Ferguson, they did do one thing to slightly improve it. The state of Missouri put a cap. Can only be 20% of the budget of your city, money that you take in these fines, okay? And 12.5 in some other places. But if you look at what happened in Ferguson before it became famous, 2013, there were 9,000 warrants out for people who hadn't paid yet. Only 21,000 people live in Ferguson. 9,000 warrants out. Some people had multiple. Add to that, they were taking $1.4 million in fees for a total general fund budget of $11 million, so more than 10%. And then in 5 years later, 2015, it was $3.1 million out of a total budget of $13 million, so almost a quarter of the budget. Pressure on the cops, go out. The gentleman in Missouri who put the bill together to put caps on this, state legislator told me that police would get in their pay stubs, in their pay checks, little notices. If we don't get more tickets, there won't be pay increases. Go out and protect the people of your city, or at least give tickets. There was an effort to try and fix some of this in San Francisco, it's called Fix. There's an app to help you contest and pay your parking tickets. And they found that about half of the parking tickets actually aren't owed, because you get a picture. They have people take a picture of their parking ticket, and they can, from Google, find out where everything was, where you actually parked, where you weren't allowed to park. They win 20 to 30% of the cases. The guy who runs it, founder David Hegarty, he says we'd win half if the other team played by their own rules, but they don't. But we get 20 to 30% found wrong. The response to that was not to suggest to the police that they not give tickets that aren't earned by people, but was to shut down communication with the app, to not take any communication by email from them. And when they were faxing them in, they turned their faxes off. And they said, we're not going to allow you to do this anymore. So they know the size of the problem in San Francisco, but those tickets are 12.5% of the San Francisco Municipal Transport Authority's agency's budget. So their incentive is to keep collecting taxes through tickets. How do you collect all this money? Well, you put out the tickets, but then both Missouri and California will take away your driver's license if you fall behind. There's a study here that I just find awfully difficult to believe, but I suppose I believe it, that 4 million today, now, 4 million people in California have suspended licenses. 4 million. 4 point what? 4.2. Okay, I keep, I'm going to, this can't possibly, 17% of the adults in the state are not driving legal, or they're not driving. What's the fine? Well, the fine is you can't work that day if you have to drive to work. A study in New Jersey said 42% of the people who got their licenses pulled or suspended lost their jobs because you can't get to work. So the fine isn't $100. The fine's your job. Or even if you're only doing it for a couple weeks, it's several weeks of your job every day. And one last thought, when they tell you what the fine is in California, it's an interesting study. If we only had, the fine was $100. Here's what they add to that base fine. If it was more than 100, everything ramps up. We add a state penalty assessment, which doubles it, another $100. A state crime surcharge of 20% on the 100, $20. A court operations assessment, $40. A court construction fee, $50. A county fund, they're in on it, $70. The DNA fund, oh, that sounds very useful and good, $50. The emergency medical air transport fee for your car, okay. The EMS fund is $20. The conviction assessment is $35. The night court assessment is $1. That's $490 is what you owe when they told you that, oh, we're charging $100 for breaking the rules here. If you make the mistake of not paying on time, that jumps up to $815, okay? The earlier discussion was what happens when you turn policemen into revenuers or prohibition agents, and how does that affect their ability to actually be police and protect people? We've turned too many of them into tax collectors and then wondered why people aren't being protected, why citizens don't see them as allies or friends. And I think this is a piece, and a significant piece, of the effort, broader effort that both people on the right and the left here in D.C. and throughout the states are working on in terms of criminal justice reform. I think this can be an area of consensus. It's an issue I think we need to work on, and I think we're in a very helpful place in moving forward on each of these issues. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, and thank you for the focus.